in order to address that, I do have a coordination group here that is focusing on that stimulant of cocaine. Thankfully, we have a great partner in Colombia. And under President Duque of Colombia, they have pledged to the United States a 50% reduction of the amount of coca that is grown. So hopefully that will be achieved. So far, they're on target, and we've seen some dramatic reductions there toward that 50% goal by 2023. And so hopefully we'll begin to see some of the impact here on the streets. The other stimulant, again, that has been around but in a very different way is methamphetamine. Methamphetamine, the synthetic, has been around, as I said, and traditionally, historically, looking back, it was a domestic product. It was something that was made in back rooms, in small quantities, using medication that you could buy at the pharmacy. When that changed, when those rules made it harder to obtain the precursor chemicals, what we saw has been a dramatic shift to Mexico of methamphetamine. I have another coordination group here that is focusing on the problems out of Mexico. Primarily, what we're seeing is the heroin and fentanyl problem, but also the methamphetamine problem coming out of Mexico. So I have our two main coordination groups focused on these stimulants. Out of Mexico, what we're seeing is more and more methamphetamine coming across into the United States in greater quantities, but greater purity as well. The men and women of CBP have done some, Customs Border Protection, CBP, have done some amazing work. At year end 2019, kilogram seizures of methamphetamine was about 106,000 kilograms, which is 15 times higher than 2009. And so while we're seizing more drugs than ever before, because people are going through, trucks are going through, vehicles, individuals, every form of conveyance is going through checkpoints, which is what we want, there's greater seizures. But what we also know, because we're feeling it and seeing it on the streets of Pennsylvania, is methamphetamine that continues to just really run wild through different parts of the state. Thankfully, we do have dedicated men and women across the both international, but really the federal, state, and local level. What we're seeing is this methamphetamine traditionally coming in, or right now coming through across the border into the southwest part of our country, into California, Arizona, Texas, those areas, and then either being trucked, mailed, a variety of ways, getting throughout the rest of the United States. As I mentioned, we're doing record seizures, record amounts. There's record amounts of cash being seized, which I'm sure the Attorney General would probably agree with me, that that's one of the most important ways to hit these drug traffickers, is taking away the source of money, and that's going back there. But what we know is the methamphetamine, the opioid use that is going on across the United States is taking a toll. About 2 years ago, we announced for the first time a reduction in the number of Americans dying of a drug overdose. Now what we're seeing is, between the rise of COVID, is sadly some people either reverting back and a variety of factors themselves know, depression, cut off from service. What we're also seeing is that with some of the programs on prevention not being able to occur, is that some of those aren't happening as well. Sadly, what we're seeing now is a 5%, at least preliminary numbers are showing about a 5% increase over last year to go back to high levels of overdoses. So what do we know? We know that some of the programs that we've been working on the last few years will work. We saw, as I said, the first time there was a reduction. we need to continue those programs. Thankfully, there's been an announcement about a vaccine, and I'm very hopeful that will start flowing not only to nursing homes and hospitals, but also to our treatment centers, because we need to recognize that we all do, and we need the rest of the country to recognize that there are also medical providers. And so as we continue to make great work on the vaccine, we need to make sure that the people in our world of addiction have the ability to access that, have the ability to go to treatment safely, have the healthcare workers, the folks who work on this critical issue, be able to do their jobs safely. The work that you all do is difficult. And when I looked at the conference and looked at the topics, I thought that they're all absolutely spot on. The issues that we're facing with the stimulant use is sad in many ways. One, of course, is the fact that we really do not have the medication-assisted treatment that we have for opioids. There's some under development, but from all accounts, there's none that are on the horizon anytime in the very near future. And so we continue to struggle to treat those people with medication while we're giving them the much needed counseling, the much needed other parts of care that they so desperately need. So it's a great honor to be able to be with you, to recognize the work that all you all are doing, the impact that it's having on you all, the fact that there is so much work being done, but also the folks of law enforcement who are out there and trying to deal with folks who are under the influence of stimulants and the challenges that that faces. So between the challenges that we discussed here today, at times we must feel, and I know I certainly do at times, feel that the odds are against us. What we have to remember, though, is when you look virtually around the room about the number of folks that are participating, when you look, we have the Attorney General here from Pennsylvania, the amount of thought, attention, care, and love that is trying to be circled and provided to these folks, we should remain hopeful that by continuing to provide the continuum of care, by continuing to go after the source of drugs coming into Pennsylvania and coming into our country, that we will be back on track showing a reduction in the number of lives being lost to these drugs. So congratulations on having a virtual but successful conference on this, and I sincerely appreciate the honor of being able to join you all this morning. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back to you, Kimberly.
We appreciate your remarks on a national perspective.
Honored speaker.
Our next speaker will focus on efforts in the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. It's my pleasure to introduce Attorney General Josh Shapiro.
Hey, good morning, everyone. And if you could just let me know you can hear me and see me. I was having some technical issues earlier. Am I with you?
Yes.
Terrific.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Well, first off, Jim Carroll, thank you for your work all across this country. I appreciate you and appreciate the work of your office. And clearly, we all need to be working together to address this multi-pronged crisis. And I'm very grateful for your commitment to do that work and doing it each and every day. I wish you the very best. I want to especially thank my good friend Jerry Daly, who's the reason I'm here today. Jerry does terrific work as the Mid-Atlantic HIDA's Executive Director. I'm grateful to him, grateful for the collaboration and the partnership that we've had and that my team has had with him, and I sincerely thank Jerry. And of course, our DDAP Secretary, Jennifer Smith. One of the things we really pride ourselves on is making sure that we work in a collaborative manner with local, state, and federal partners, and DDAP is an unbelievably important partner in all of this because, of course, we recognize we can't arrest our way out of this crisis and that drug addiction is a disease, not a crime. And so when we look at it that way, we recognize that we not only have a multi-pronged problem, that we must have a multidisciplinary approach and solution to addressing it. And then I, of course, want to thank everyone who's here, everyone who's on this virtual conference. Of course, I wish we were together, that we were having the opportunity to interact, physically and personally. But I just want to tell you, not only thank you for your work, but I want to wish you a very happy holidays and wish you safety and good health for you and yours. I'll just offer a few thoughts off the top here, and then I want to let you get into the crux of your conversation here today. And I want to take a minute and talk about meth, which I've been talking about for years now. And when I began talking about it, 3.5, 4 years ago as an emerging threat, people kind of scratched their head and looked at me and said, "Well, wait, we're focused on opioids. We can't sort of walk and chew gum at the same time." That has obviously changed, and more people now recognize just how serious of a challenge meth is. Meth and other psychostimulants are on the rise here in Pennsylvania. It is a growing menace made only more dangerous by the pandemic that we find ourselves in. Just to give you some data to back that up, between 2017 and 18, our Bureau of Narcotics investigation and our agents led by our great Chief Dave Ellis, can attest to this. We had seizures of meth alone. Our seizures jumped by 154%. Our seizures rose from 5,000 grams, that's about 20,000 doses, if you will, to almost 13,000 or 52,000 doses in 2017-18. And now to give you some context of where it is just in this past year, they've increased by another 177%, yielding almost 35,000 additional grams, another 140,000 doses of methamphetamine. That is just a significant amount of these dangerous poisons making their way into our communities. And I think for all of us in law enforcement, we recognize that addressing illegal drugs in our communities are a key part of our core responsibilities. Certainly it is for me. And my office battles this epidemic on all fronts. We target dealers who are poisoning our communities. We hold drug companies accountable. And we try and work with our partners like DDAP and others to bolster treatment all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. No matter where I go across Pennsylvania, virtually or physically, I hear the same thing, and that is that in order to really address this crisis, we need more avenues to treatment. We need more access to treatment. I've had moms who have lost their teenage sons cry in my arms from Beaver County to North Philadelphia, talking to me about what their kids used to be like before they got hooked on these drugs and wishing that there were resources and treatment available to them in their communities. And so we've tried on a number of fronts, both through collaboration and initiative, to bring that treatment about. Let me just tell you about one real quick, and that is the Office of Attorney General's Law Enforcement Treatment Initiative, a program that is now expanded to 5 counties across Pennsylvania, where you can literally walk in the front door of a police department and ask for help. And assuming you don't have some outstanding arrest warrant, those officers have now been trained to marry you up with treatment available in your community, in your neighborhood. That is so critically important, both to get people to help and to help them realize that law enforcement is here to assist, that law enforcement doesn't have to be a scary conversation with law enforcement, but it can be an assistive one. And I'm incredibly proud of the work that our team has done to bring LETI about, and of course we want to expand it into all 67 counties. Getting law enforcement involved in these initial steps, referring someone into treatment, minimizing the stigma associated with getting help, these are all critically important things that need to be done, and we're doing it. The other thing I'll mention is that I'm one of just a handful of attorneys general from across the country who have been leading the national conversation about a massive opioid settlement, if you will, a settlement with the manufacturers and distributors that would distribute tens of billions of dollars in treatment to local communities, of course here in Pennsylvania as well. I hope to be able to have some more concrete news to share with you in the coming months on that, but make no mistake, that money will go into treatment and it will help save lives. So look, again, I just want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to tell you how much I appreciate the work that you do. Again, I want to thank Jim for his work and the work of our federal partners, and to all of you here on the ground in Pennsylvania. Know how much we appreciate you and know how much we depend on you in order to deal with this crisis. So with that, I will turn the floor back, and I want to thank all of you for giving me some time this morning. Thank you, and stay safe.
Thank you, Attorney General Shapiro. We appreciate both you and Director Carroll speaking with us today. Our next two sessions will be moderated by Department of Drug and Alcohol's Allie Gantz. So take it away, Allie. Allie, you're on mute. And trust me, I know this because I did it yesterday.
You did. Thank you, Kim, Director Carroll, and Attorney General Shapiro. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing Katie Donovan. Katie will speak on her family's journey through her daughter's substance use disorder. Thank you for being here, Katie.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here. And I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to share from the family perspective, not only from my own journey, but representing families and moms across the nation. You know, this morning I got up early and I was sitting there with my coffee. It was still dark out and I had the Christmas lights on and I was going over my slides and saying a little prayer that I find the right words this morning to make sure that I find an impact. And I usually do that before each presentation. And as I'm staring at my tree, I noticed the top of the lights of the tree were burnt out and the bow was a little crooked and the tree was slightly bent going the other way. And I thought, I realized that's all of us. We're all a little bit bent, a little bit imperfect. And some days we probably have more lights out than others, but yet you're still beautiful. All of us, flaws and all. And so I slightly changed my presentation because words were coming to me that I just had to write down, and it's a big passion of mine and healing for me as I write. So it's a little raw, but I did write this morning. In the picture here is my daughter Brittany. She's my loved one who has struggled, and what I'm going to share with you right now is a very vivid memory. That was my transformational point in life. I can barely see as I drive through the pouring rain, my eyes filled with tears, breath gasping with a depth of despair I've never felt before. Leave me alone. Just everyone, leave me alone. I'm screaming to no one but myself. My hands are glued to the steering wheel, trying to navigate through the heavy rain as the windshield begins to fog. As I pull up to a red light, my chest is heaving with deep, uncontrollable sobs. I can't do this anymore. I just can't. I'm screaming again. I'm screaming at God. I'm screaming at the rearview mirror. I'm screaming at the people on the road. My throat is hoarse with grief. Living life with this much pain, tearing me apart inside, is not life. I keep driving. I hear the windshield wipers squeak as the rain pellets hit the glass. Other than that and my screaming, there is silence. But the voices in my head are loud and clear. Just drive that car into a tree. You see that one on the left? Just pull across the lanes when traffic clears and floor it. Do it. Your pain will be gone. I contemplate this move, and I process how I can get across traffic without hitting any others or hurting anybody else. It's all I can think about. I drive faster with no destination in mind. I just want to go. I want to run away where no one can find me. I need some peace. Smashing my car into a tree seems like the perfect way to achieve that. You see, an hour earlier, my husband John had called from work. Katie, can you take the garbage out? I forgot it's garbage day. That's when I lost it. I went off on him like a lunatic. I mean, bonkers, like lost it, swearing and screaming, things flying out of my mouth that wasn't me. And I don't even know why. I slammed the phone down and I ran from the kitchen to the garage door and I jumped in my car and I took off. And I feel so bad now because he did nothing wrong. Why did I do that? I'm so tired. I'm tired of being pulled in so many different directions. I'm tired of being the one who was supposed to fix everything. From running back and forth to doctor's appointments, to finding rehabs, to navigating insurance, to making excuses to family, to the drama and chaos that seems to happen every single day. I am spent. I'm tired of putting on the fake smile, the pretend happiness to my boss, the constant arguments with my husband about our daughter Brittany, trying to be the perfect mother to my youngest little Brooke and protect her, yet collapsing inside as my Brittany is dying, a slow, painful, walking death as she injects heroin and crack into her arms. I am helpless to stop the madness, yet I have tried so hard for so many years. My family is crumbling before my eyes, and I don't know how to fix it. How do I save them? I feel like an absolute failure. The ring of my cell phone startles me out of my thoughts. I look down, and it's John. Oh my God, please leave me alone. I don't answer. He keeps calling over and over and over. I slow down to a yellow light, and when I came to a stop, I look down at my feet, and I realize I still have my slippers on. I keep my hands tightly around the wheel. As the rain now has turned into a full-blown thunderstorm, I can feel my palms moist, and I realize that my forehead is as well. I know I am panicking. I see a grocery store up ahead, so I begin to make the transition of changing lanes. And I decide to park the car as the rain slows down. I pull into a spot and I make sure it's far away from the action of the store. I don't want anyone to see me. I look in the rearview mirror at myself and I'm shocked at what I see. Who is this girl? I don't know who I am anymore. I am lost in devastating grief, knowing I have tried so hard to save Brittany. What kind of a mother am I? How did this happen? I scream. I feel so defeated and alone. Very, very alone. My husband is calling over and over and over again. I finally answer. Where are you? He yells. I don't even know. I can hear the rain through the phone on his end, and I realize he must have left work and he's trying to find me. You see, this is not John. This is not my husband. The guy never misses work, ever. Once he broke some ribs after colliding with my cousin during a softball game, and he went to work the next day, his chest taped up, carrying his laptop in his backpack, and I can see the pain in his face as he gently swung it over his shoulder. My man is tough, and I realize now how much I must have worried him, and I feel really bad. I'm coming, Katie. Don't move. So I sit there, because honestly, I don't know what else to do. I don't want to go home. Home is pain. Home is chaos. Home is fear. Home isn't home anymore. John got there about 20 minutes later, and when he jumped into the passenger seat, I am so distraught with emotion, but I'm not crying anymore. My heart is just so heavy, I can barely look at him. That would take effort that I don't have right now, and I'm just staring straight ahead, motionless. Katie, you really need to get some help, please. I need you. Brooke needs you. You are so obsessed with saving Brittany, but you forgot about us. You have a whole other family who needs you. We are here too. He's now crying. I slowly nod. I know he's right. And then he said something that I'll never forget. He said, "You know what, honey? If anything ever happened to you, I don't think Brittany could survive." In my heart, I know what he means. He doesn't mean emotionally. He means in life. And he's absolutely right. I was doing everything for her. And why? Because I didn't think she could handle it. I admitted that. What kind of a mother does that? What am I really teaching her? To rely on others? To not be responsible or accountable for her actions? And not be the independent, strong woman I know she can be? Shame on me. I was so paralyzed by her addiction that my fear of her dying was running and ruining my life. I was trying to protect her, thinking if I could just take her worries away, she would get better. I also didn't tell a soul about her struggles. Was it shame that some talk about? No, never. Not for me. I was never, ever ashamed of my daughter. I think I was trying to protect her from judgment of others. What if she got better? Nobody needed to know. Please, go to a support group, Katie, or a therapist. Do something. My husband was pleading with me. He brought the reality of our life into focus for me. I was so lost in my daughter's disease, right along with her. I had become addicted to her. And I was losing everything, right along with it. I share this because it's real. I share this because I want you to know the impact that this has on families. They say that this is a family disease, but quite honestly, it's not treated as such. Our family, we were pretty typical. 2 kids, a dog. We live in Michigan, and we would take winter vacations to Florida. One of these photos is from Easter many years ago on the beach. My husband coached our daughters' soccer teams and basketball teams. I was the Girl Scout leader and taught her catechism class when she made her first communion. Our house was the family house that everybody kind of came to and hung out with for the pool parties, and I was the volunteer mom at lunches in the school parties because I wanted to be there. I wanted to be there and be involved in my kids' lives, and I also wanted to see who the others were, right? Maybe the ones that they shouldn't hang around with. And as my daughter Brittany was growing up, she was involved in everything. She was the honor roll student. She played softball and dance and baton and band and everything that she could get involved in, she did with a passion and in life. And so in her senior year, we didn't understand how this could have started. And quite honestly, in the beginning, I didn't even realize what was happening because she had always been that good kid with straight A's. And she started dating a boy. He played hockey, seemed like a really good kid. Little did I know that he had been prescribed Vicodin due to a hockey injury. Now, granted, this was way back in 2001, and I don't think the information was out there then about the dangers of prescription opioids or prescription narcotics in general. Certainly now it is, but I didn't realize the signs. I didn't realize the dangers, and I certainly didn't realize what was happening. But my daughter started taking those on the weekends, and that became their party drug. They didn't really drink, smoke marijuana. They took a pill. And unfortunately, my daughter's body loved it. And it loved it so much that within a year, she was living in this house that's in the photo in a really bad neighborhood in Detroit. With overdoses and overdoses, years upon years, in treatment center after treatment center, and then jail. She had an overdose, and they found one Xanax on her, and she was facing a felony. And after years and years of this devastating our entire family, not knowing what to do, you go from tough love to using as much love as you possibly can do. And as she was manipulating me, I was manipulating right back, but not realizing, because I was going to say and I was going to do anything to get my daughter the help that she needed. Families are distraught by this. And my youngest daughter, although we protected her from the visions of all that was happening, I know that myself, I still went to all of her events and I was still there as her mother, but I don't think I was physically, mentally there because my sole focus was on saving my daughter, Brittany. And it was destroying our entire family. Sometimes when my husband would say, you're too easy on her, right? And I would say, you're too hard on her. You just don't get it. She just needs our love. I wish that anything could have fixed her, but I especially wished my love could have. After 10 years of her struggles, I had my family back. This photo, although it may seem simple to so many, was our first family photo in my daughter's sobriety. And it meant more to me than if she graduated with a master's from college, because she fought, and she was winning. And I had my family together again. She poured her life into this. And that's when I ended up leaving my own career, because I saw the family side that was being affected, but yet we're just told go to a support group. Nothing really was left for us, even treatment centers who said they had a family program. We really didn't. You might be lucky to get 10 minutes with a therapist. Brittany put her life into everything. She bought a new car with her own money. She went skydiving. Our family was joking and making laughs again. We didn't walk on eggshells anymore. This is a Facebook post my daughter had made a few years ago. And she said, on Sundays we slay and pray. And she would go to church. And then she would go to the beach. And she would read the big book. And this was her boyfriend at the time, Adam. He was in recovery for many years as well. And such an amazing young man. Three days after this photo was taken, Adam died of an overdose. And with that, my daughter spiraled right back down with him after 3 years of sobriety. It's devastating to families. And I share this picture because it says, son, I completed all 12 steps for you. They're in your bedroom along with your clean laundry. I share that because as families, we want to protect our kids and we want to do everything for them because our fear of them struggling, we think if they are nervous, if they're scared, if they can't complete this, if they don't get up for work in time, if they have a struggle, they're going to relapse and then they're going to die. There's no in between. Families are truly faced with fear and stigma and judgment all the time. It's not just our loved ones who struggle with addiction. I can tell you for a fact myself, even there was a time where my daughter had overdosed. And when I got to the hospital, I overheard the nurse say, "Oh, look, the junkie's mom is here." That's my daughter. And she's sick. And I understand that the behaviors that they have and that she had when she was sick weren't the best behaviors. But those behaviors were also symptoms of her disease. And inside, that's not who she is. You hear things of, where were the parents? That was my kid. Right? This is the whispered disease. Did you hear about Sally's son? I remember a therapist telling me one time to stop killing your kid. And at the time, I was so offended by this. Obviously, that's not what I'm doing or trying to do. I'm loving my child the best way that I know how. And just like with anything in life, the more we learn, the more we get educated, the stronger we become. But in those times of despair and not knowing what to do, the last thing that someone should say are these things and these archaic phrases and meanings that they have to hit rock bottom. That's archaic. That's death. We're so supposed to just let go and let them figure it out. And don't talk to me when you've got X amount clean time. Tough love. Don't let the door hit you in the butt. And that we're powerless. I don't believe that. There is power in healthy communication. There is power in loving your child, but in a different way. There is power in letting go of chaos, but do not detach and just wait for them to figure it out. As a parent, we do have to love a little bit differently. And it's difficult when we're labeled along the way. We're told we're enablers. We're told we're codependent. We need some boundaries. But people don't really take the time to families and truly explain what that is. So when families hear this, we're shutting down. We're not going to reach out for help now because we're being judged. And then yet we also are told we're going to go to a meeting. I remember my first support group meeting that I did go to. I drove and I sat in the parking lot for the entire hour and I cried my eyeballs out and I never went in because walking in to me felt like I was a failure. I couldn't fix this. What was wrong with me? And so putting that into perspective with our loved ones, and we're wanting them to go get help, but yet we're not working on ourselves. What we're really feeling, though, is anger and resentment and fear and anxiety, depression, grief. We're grieving our child who is still alive, but we see dying. That's what needs to be spoken to and talked about with our families, because this is what we are doing as family members. We're completely losing our own identity. We don't want to see anyone anymore. We don't want to get out of bed. We don't know how to function in life. We're the cleanup crew. That's all we are, putting out fires all the time. And we become resentful. I gave you $20. And then if they spend it on something else, we're angry. But in all honesty, we chose that. And we have to accept it. And I had to realize with that, I needed to shift my own behaviors. I couldn't change my daughter. I couldn't control her behaviors, but I needed to start healthy communication. And I believe in recovering together as a family. All relationships need to heal and need to work on. I needed to focus more on responding versus reacting to every situation. I needed to listen. And listen, I mean not interrupt with what I thought she should do. Just be her mom and listen to her heart. Listen to her share her pain. How do I know what is best for her recovery? It's a process. It's not an event. But what I needed to do was accept my daughter for who she is, using drugs or not, and love. I can step out of the madness though. And I needed to remove expectations of how I felt she should recover and focus on myself. That's what I needed to do. And stay the heck out of her recovery. I truly feel as a family, we go on this journey together. Just like life, it's going to have ups and downs. But looking in acceptance and gratitude, I'm one of the lucky ones because my daughter's still alive. She's here. And I have the blessing and gratitude to be able to share with you on behalf of so many other families across the world who are struggling. And I can share on my own blog. And families get it. I do believe we must unite. We must unite together and listen without judgment and not shame someone if they slip. Our primary objective is connection and coordination throughout the entire world, and stakeholders is crucial with this. And understanding families and meeting them where they're at too, and implementing true family coaching and family help is what is needed. Because when families become stronger, their loved one has a much greater chance of becoming stronger too. I thank you all for this opportunity. We might have a minute or two left. I'm not sure, Kayla, but we might have a minute or two if we can open it up for questions. If not, I truly understand. But thank you so much. It's been a blessing.
Hi, Katie. We actually are out of time. If anyone would like to submit any questions, they can do that and we can send them to you and coordinate after the.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. That was incredibly impactful.
Yeah.
Next, we have John Eady and Dr. Carrie Thomas Getz, who will be discussing changes in drug seizures by law enforcement and the prescribing of controlled substances. John is the Public Health and Prescription Drug Monitoring Program Project Coordinator for the National Emerging Threats Initiative, and Dr. Carrie Thomas Getz is the Senior Epidemiologist for the Pennsylvania Department of Health Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. Thank you both for being here, and John, you're up first.
John, we're not hearing you. I think you need to connect your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. I first want to thank Katie enormously from my heart for that wonderful and, well, it's not that heart-rending story that she shared with us, but what she shared so beautifully and so heartfully to bring us all up to date with what she and her family have gone through. It's terribly important that we all recognize it. And that's why we're in this business. That's why we work so hard to try to stop this epidemic of not only opioids, but also now moving on, we've got to deal with stimulants. Now, I work for the National Emerging Threats Initiative, which is part of the National HIDA program, and I'm going to get into our report, which is aimed at providing early warning to all of the parties involved in dealing with these drugs of abuse. Let's talk about the supply of the drugs first. We're going to talk about both opioids and we're going to talk about stimulants. We're going to start with law enforcement seizure data from the high-intensity drug trafficking areas in the country through their performance management process, or PMP is what it's officially called. You can see from this chart that in 2019, that HIDA seizures were focused 60% on coke and crack, 37% on meth, and down to 3% left on on heroin and meth. So while we indeed have been dealing with an opioid crisis of major proportion, we can see that in recent years that we've shifted. And you heard from the Attorney General earlier about that and how meth has become a big problem. Well, it is. And this chart reflects that. Moving on. Heroin seizures. Heroin, you can see here, has been seized by the high-intensity drug trafficking areas around the country in increasing quantities over the years, starting at approximately 2,100, 2,200 kilograms in 2011, rising up to 3 times that amount by 2019. This is the distribution around the country, and this reflects heroin. The red shading reflects increases in the supply. The darker the red, the greater the increase in supply. That's, again, comparing 2011 to 2019. And you can see that in, for example, northern Florida, it was heavily concentrated. But it was all throughout the country with very few exceptions. Northeast US, Michigan, Arizona, and Puerto Rico. Everywhere else, it was an increase in heroin seizures. Let's look at opioid prescriptions. I won't go into the detail here, but if you want to go back and look at the slide and see where you are on this slide, it'll be helpful to you. The high-intensity drug trafficking areas are on the left, and then matched are the prescription drug monitoring programs that we asked for and received data from to show us as examples of each of those HIDAs where they are standing in terms of opioid prescribing during the time period. Again, the time period again is, in this case, 2010 to 2019. What is really interesting, if you look at this chart, is you will see that in every state that we looked at, save one on the second page, there was a peaking of the opioids and then a decrease. That we finally, after 2 full decades of increases in prescribing of opioids, to the point that they've become such a national problem, they finally peaked and they finally began to drop off. And that is carried on the next slide as well. And you can see that with the exception of New Mexico, all the states have reported drops in the numbers of prescriptions that they have filled in those states. So that is the broad picture on opioids. Let's look at the seizures that reflect stimulants, starting with cocaine. you can see that there's been a very steep rise in cocaine. It started low in the beginning, i.e. 2011, and has risen rapidly up through 2018, slight downturn in 2019. Very big problem for the country. Again, looking at the national map, you see again in the red is the intense increases. The darker the red, the more the increase, and you can see up in the northeast United States, and even in the in the middle of the country, in Minnesota, Wisconsin, they're very heavy increases. You may ask, why are they dotted, not full states? And that's because they represent the counties. HIDAs are dealing with high-intensity drug trafficking areas, which are defined as counties, specific counties and states. So the colors represent the various counties, and the color changes represent the different HIDAs that are involved. And HIDAs can be as small as one state, like Michigan. They can be 2 states, like Wisconsin and Minnesota. They can be 6 states, like in New England. They can also be multiple HIDAs in a single state. And Florida has 3, and California has 4. So it all depends on the states and the circumstances, but the counties are what's a key factor, and the colors are applied to the counties that are part of HIDAs. And so you can see also in the center of the country and in Michigan, there's very high intensity. But also, there are other HIDAs in the country where cocaine seizures decreased. And this is important because what we've learned is that the overdose deaths track very closely with the law enforcement seizures of drugs. And so much so that we can actually use the law enforcement seizures as a way of predicting what's coming next in terms of deaths. Let's look at methamphetamine seizures. Whoa, take a look at what happened after 2017. Low at first, and then look at it take off, just as the Attorney General was speaking about. And across the country, there's been this huge surge, and it is up 10 times more. By 2019, it's 10 times what it was in 2011. Huge increase. And let's look again at the country. This time, unlike cocaine, the methamphetamine increases are everywhere. There are no areas, no HIDAs that were blue. There's no HIDAs where they went down. They went up every part of the country, and just a question of intensity. Once again, Minnesota and Wisconsin tend to lead the way. You can see very heavy concentrations down in South Florida and along the Gulf of Mexico. Let's move along. Let's look at prescriptions. Let's look at, excuse me. In looking at prescriptions, the picture is totally different than it was for opioids. In the case of prescriptions, I'm sorry, I keep bumping it. In the case of prescriptions, the prescriptions have in every state increased substantially during this time period. And by the way, if you're wondering why some states don't have full breadth of data, they only have like 3 years, that's because those states didn't start their prescription drug monitoring program until very recently. Other states have been at it for decades. And so for like New York on the far left, you can see they've got all of the years 2010 through 2019 logged in. But that's why that, but regardless of whether it's 3 years or 10 years, you can see they're all going up steadily through this period. And they're increasing by as much as 50% in this 10-year period. And the same thing is true in these other regions. I should note that we've blocked them in terms of geographical regions simply to make it practical to work with it. And if you want to get your data to look at it more carefully, the slides I showed you up earlier before opioids give you the mapping as to where the regions are and where the states are and where the high intensity drug trafficking areas are that match those states. Here, you can see once again they're rising. Even Texas on the far left, which has given us data for 3 years, is low, but it's picking up by the 3rd year. And so the others all go. Arizona shows a slight downturn but that slight downturn is still much higher than the beginning of the time period. So that all of these across the board reflect what is a very significant and very serious problem. And I want to make sure that we're all aware of that at least nationally, the problem is not just with methamphetamine, though it's huge with methamphetamine, but it's also with cocaine and it's also with prescription stimulants. The demand for drugs, let's look at that for a moment. This shows new initiates, people who for the very first time used a drug non-medically, in the case of the prescription opioids, which is the light blue color on top. And you can see across the time from 2011 to 2018 that there has been a significant rise even during that time period. And don't forget, we've had surges in prescription opioid problems for 2 full decades leading up to this. But it was still at 2 million in 2018. But please also note that there was a slight downturn beginning in 2016. And if you remember back to what we saw earlier, we saw a downturn in prescribing at the same time. And down at the bottom is a dark blue, that reflects heroin. And again, that's new initiates, people who in the 12 months before of that survey used the drug for the first time. So that's new initiates for prescription opioids and for heroin. Moving on, and you see stimulants, the same idea, and you can see the huge bubble in stimulant use that began in 2014 and surged upward, and you can see that in 2016 that it reached the highest point there. Still, by 2018, there were 2.1 million new initiates for the stimulants. The bright red on top are prescription stimulants. The orange in the middle reflects the methamphetamine, and the darker red on the bottom reflects cocaine, new initiates. So you can see how rapidly this took off, and it follows the same kind of trajectories as the lines of the seizures showed you earlier. And please bear in mind one thing, and that is that the way the data is collected and put out by SAMHSA means that there probably are people who are duplicates. That is, there are probably some people who began use of cocaine and of a prescription stimulant during this period of time, and therefore these numbers are not the actual complete unique numbers, but there is some duplication. But it gives you an idea where it's going, and it's big, and it's as big now in terms of new initiates as the opioids. Let's look at another use. This is past year users. This represents people who during the 12 months prior to the survey used the drugs once or more. And in the case of opioid prescriptions, used them non-medically. So those, again, the light blue on top, heroin on the bottom. And you can see, because this is a much bigger number, the new initiates were 2 million in 2018, but the past year users were 10.8 million. And you might ask, why is this number so much bigger? And that's because it's not just new initiates, it's because it contains all of the people who initiated use earlier, in some earlier year. So you've got all these people who've continued using through years and sometimes decades. And again, so you can see, but at the same time, that there is a breaking point in 2015, and it's begun to come down in the subsequent years, just as the prescribing has come down. So that the supply of opioid prescriptions and the new, or the people using, have both come down at about the same rate. This is stimulant, past year users. Once again, the colors are the same as I described before, and you can just see how high they are, that they actually reached 12.5 million by 2018, which is higher than the total number we had, the accumulated number we had for the opioids. So we no longer have an opioid epidemic alone by any means. We have a stimulant epidemic on top of the opioid epidemic. They're going simultaneously. Neither one is over. We're a long way from over. let's look at supply and demand a different way. Let's look at them together by drug. Heroin, you can see that the blue represents seizures by HIDAs. The orange line represents new initiates. And you can see that there's been some motion and that there is tracking together, but it's even more definite when you look at the opioid prescriptions, and you can just see how closely the two lines intersect and work together. Cocaine, crack, very similar. Methamphetamine and ice, you can see once again with the new initiates going up and the height of seizures going up. Stimulant new initiates, you can see the same thing pattern there. Supplies and deaths. This looks at the same thing, that is the supply as reflected by seizures of the drugs and prescriptions. And in this case, we're looking at heroin seizures, the blue line, and we're looking at drug-related overdose deaths in the orange line. And you can see that how closely those two track, even more closely than the new initiates did. That the overdose deaths track very, very closely on the supplies. Same thing with opioid prescriptions that we've talked about. That as the supply of prescriptions has begun to come down, so have the overdose deaths. Look at cocaine and crack, they're just totally intertwined going up. Methamphetamine and ice, once again, they track together. So what's really important about what you've seen is the evidence from this that the overdose deaths and the seizures track together. And for your work in the state of Pennsylvania, and for every state, what's really a lesson that you can take away from this is that the seizure data is available from law enforcement within a very short time of the occurrence, like within weeks, maybe a month. The data on overdose deaths can't be available to you for as much as a year to 2 years because the medical examiners have to complete their examinations. They have to send laboratory tests out for testing and get the test results back. They have to do death scene investigations. They have a lot of work to do to finalize the use of the data for overdose deaths. And so you have the potential to take the seizure data from law enforcement and you can project ahead to the overdose deaths and say that we can actually tell communities and we can tell a state, your state, what to expect next in terms of surges in overdose deaths. And you can do so as much as 18 months ahead. So this is a very powerful tool for you to use. And we had data from the state of Ohio that showed just how closely these track together. They track together month by month. It's not just year by year, but month by month. And so you have a really powerful tool at your disposal, and we encourage you to use it. And as you set up your own initiative in the state to have an early warning system. And we will be happy to assist and work with that effort. Now, what is the outlook? Because I've just talked about how you can use the data to look ahead, we did the same thing for the nation as part of our 2019 Emerging Threats Report. First of all, we looked at what the data tells us, and we have two major trends that we've seen. One has to do with opioids, and we know that prescription opioids were the driving force behind the opioid epidemic, and that has been finally capped. And by the way, when I say that's the driving force, if you think back to those charts that showed new initiates and past year users, you saw graphically together how many people were using prescription opioids, which was that huge group of light blue color. And then compared to heroin, which is the dark blue line at the bottom, which was much smaller. And so you can see clearly how the opioid prescriptions have driven the whole opioid epidemic. And we are blessed in being able to say that finally the prescription opioids peaked during about 2015, or within a year or two of that date, for all of the states we looked at. And that had been going on for 2 solid decades. And the demand also began to decline at the same time, as did deaths. What do we predict for the future? We predict continuing decreases, with the caveat that the decreases may slow down during the COVID-19 crisis. We know that the COVID-19 problem has resulted in increased drug use, and for a variety of reasons. So this decrease in the abuse of opioid prescriptions may slow down for the next year or two, but we anticipate or hope that it will pick back up again when the COVID-19 crisis is over. Again, as part of the outlook for heroin as another opioid, you can see that the levels of abuse were well below that of prescription opioids. So we talked about that. And we anticipate that supply, demand, and overdose deaths are expected. We had said when we put this report out that they would minimally increase. Actually, they continued to decrease, which is what we had seen in the supply in 2018 to 2019. We thought that at least the demand and overdose deaths would keep going a little bit longer. They didn't. They started decreasing even slightly during 2019. So once again, that may be impacted by COVID-19. It may level off for a bit, but we continue to expect that the trend line will be downward. On fentanyl, because fentanyl is being used in combination with other drugs, not just opioids, but also with stimulants, we are afraid that we're going to see at least a continued increase in overdose deaths involving fentanyl, likewise seizures. The other major trends has to do with stimulants. Licit and illicit stimulants are rapidly surging. That's the message. That's the second trend. Supply, demand for non-medical use, overdose deaths are going on simultaneously with the opioid epidemic, and they're intertwined with the opioid epidemic. We have slides we didn't show you, but that shows that the overdose deaths involving cocaine are closely related to fentanyl, and that is the vast majority of cocaine-related deaths now have fentanyl involved with them. We expect that cocaine is going to continue to increase overall, and supply, demand, and adverse outcomes are going to increase slightly, but definitely. Outlook for methamphetamine further increases, supply, demand, overdose deaths, all of them, and by significant numbers, especially with COVID. And I wanted to point out that when the 2019 provisional overdose deaths came out from CDC, which was in August 2020, some 9 months after we published our data, and the outlook, the predictions that we made above, that data came to us from CDC Wonder, CDC's marvelous data on deaths, and that when that data was published, that we were consistent with our predictions, that the CDC data on overdose deaths were consistent with our data regarding overdose deaths, with one exception, and that, as I mentioned, was heroin overdose deaths actually decreased in 2019 by a slight amount. We had thought they would slightly increase. And actually, had we followed the data more closely, we would have said they would slightly decrease. We just wanted to give it a little comfort room there. But in any event, they are down, and the provisional data that I noted before that we talked about overdose deaths is shown in the slides that you've just looked at. Now I'm going to stop right here a minute or two early to see if there are questions, or if Ali wants to move ahead into the next section with questions at the end. Ali, I don't know if you're ready, but I will. Oh, I do have one more slide, don't I? That's my contact information, folks. You can feel free to contact me if you wish. And if you do, just put in your subject line, Pennsylvania Symposium, so I know how you got in touch with me, and I'll go from there.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you so much, John. I think questions for the end. Questions for the end then after the next presentation, and then we can kind of split them up between you and Dr. Thomas Gatz, if that's okay.
That's good.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. Carrie, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. While they bring up my slides, I will just say that today I'm going to start by talking about some of the data from our Pennsylvania Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, or PDMP, related to Schedule II stimulant prescriptions for Pennsylvania residents. And then I'll show some overdose death data, including some preliminary 2020 data. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So in Pennsylvania, we have seen Schedule II stimulant prescriptions rising for the last several years. Between Q1 of 2012 and Q1 of 2020, Schedule II stimulant prescriptions increased about 73%. And then from Q1 2017 through Q1 2020, all schedule stimulants prescriptions increased about 10%. Next slide, please. So if you break the Schedule II stimulants down by age group, you'll see that the younger age groups are receiving a higher number of prescriptions. But despite the seasonality that we see in the younger age groups, 0 to 14 and 15 to 24-year-olds, which we suspect is related to the school year, prescriptions among these age groups have been relatively stable the last few years. The recent increases we're seeing are mainly being driven by the older age groups. I will also note, thinking about COVID and the impact that it's had on substance use and prescribing, we have seen sharp drops in all prescriptions, including Schedule II stimulants in Q2 of 2020, which captures our data from April through June of this year. And the largest decreases occurred among the school or college age recipients, which we suspect is related to the transition to home and online curriculum. But there were also decreases among all the other age groups. But right now we're not clear whether this is related to potential difficulties accessing care during the pandemic, or whether people sort of stocked up on their prescription medication in March in preparation for stay-at-home orders. If you want to go to the next slide, please. If we look at stimulant prescriptions by gender, males are more likely to receive stimulant prescriptions, likely because boys are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than girls, a trend which does hold into adulthood, although the ratio of males to females with ADHD does decrease with age. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So if we look at the specific drugs within the Schedule II stimulant drug class, we see increases in the number of patients who are receiving all types of stimulants, with the exception of methylphenidate. The values on the right-hand side of the slide show the percent change for each drug between 2013 and 2019. And then I will note that the line all the way in the bottom in light blue is prescription methamphetamine. As of 2019, we did have 61 Pennsylvania residents who were receiving a methamphetamine prescription with data submitted to the PDMP, but there's no percent change calculated there because back in 2013, that count was 0. If you want to move to the next slide, please. Then if you'll recall in slide 3, we were seeing that there were slight increases in the number of prescriptions among the younger age groups from 2012 to 2015. Then the number of prescriptions has been remaining fairly stable for the last few years, with the exception of the seasonality that we note. With fewer individuals, you can see here in the younger age groups that there's fewer number of people receiving prescriptions, indicating that younger individuals are likely going on longer term courses of stimulants. But the number of stimulant prescriptions, the number of individuals receiving stimulant prescriptions has been increasing among all of the older age groups. So one of the things we've been starting to look at recently is new initiation of stimulant prescriptions. The Department of Health does have a stimulant prescribing guidelines work group, and we got some recommendations for them to try to develop what we're calling a stimulant naive definition. And so we have looked at people who received a stimulant prescription without having received one in the past 12 months. So that's our current definition of stimulant naive. If you will go to the next slide, you can see that the proportion of individuals defined as stimulant naive with respect to Schedule II stimulants has been increasing in the last couple years. And these increases are mostly being driven by those older age groups, so 25 and older. And they're receiving stimulant 2 prescriptions for what may be the first time. I will note, our definition is only looking at the past 12 months. If you want to go to the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and switch gears and start to present some of our overdose death data. So through CDC grants, we've been conducting fatal and non-fatal overdose surveillance since 2017. Our fatal overdose surveillance, we focus on accidental and undetermined manners of death because the prevention and intervention methods you would want to implement around these types of death are slightly different than what you would want to do for, say, people who are attempting suicide via overdose. So to conduct this surveillance, we've partnered with the Bureau of Health Statistics and Registries for death record data, which we receive from them on a monthly basis, as well as individual coroner and medical examiner offices in the state to collect what we refer to as enhanced overdose death data. So the results I'm presenting here come from a combination of drug specificity data that's available via death records, as well as toxicology data directly from the coroners and medical examiners. Currently, I believe we have 52 out of the 67 coroner and medical examiner offices in the state participating with this surveillance effort. So you can see here that while we did see a dip in the number of stimulant plus opioid overdoses in 2018, overdoses involving a stimulant without an opioid present have continued to increase since 2017. And the proportion of all drug overdose deaths involving a stimulant, regardless of the presence or absence of an opioid, have continued to increase since 2017. I have included some preliminary 2020 data here, but I will caution at this time, about 18% of our 2020 overdose deaths are currently missing information about the drugs involved, while our proportion of deaths missing drug specificity for previous years is much lower. It's less than 5% for all the previous years. And 2020 isn't over yet, so I definitely expect those 2020 counts to increase. If you want to go to the next slide, please. If we look at how 2020 is tracking against 2019 by month, we can see here that there have been more stimulant-related overdose deaths every month between January and May of this year compared to 2019. I will also note that finalized death records for drug overdose deaths are often delayed by at least 3 months. We have been seeing some improvements in timeliness since a lot of coroners and medical examiners have transitioned to electronic death reporting this year. And then as death records and toxicology reports for 2020 overdose deaths continue to come in, I definitely expect these counts to increase. If you go to the next slide, please. So now I wanted to break down these stimulant-related overdose deaths down by the common stimulants that are contributing to cause of death. While we're seeing small increases in cocaine without an opioid-related overdose deaths, we are seeing larger increases in methamphetamine-related overdoses. One thing I will note that's a little bit more difficult when it comes to stimulant-related overdoses is that toxicology results do not distinguish between prescription and illicit methamphetamine, and amphetamine is a metabolite of methamphetamine. So you will also often see both on toxicology results. I'll also note the categories displayed here are not mutually exclusive. So if a person overdosed on a combination of cocaine and methamphetamine, they would be counted more than once in this graph. So while it appears that we're also seeing a large increase in amphetamine-related overdose deaths, the majority of those also involve methamphetamine, indicating they're likely related to illicitly obtained methamphetamine as opposed to prescription methamphetamine, which is rarely prescribed in Pennsylvania. If you want to go to the next slide. So I also wanted to start to break these stimulant-related overdose deaths down by some demographics. And we can see that stimulant overdoses without an opioid increased in 2019 for all age groups except the 15 to 24-year-olds, and that all age groups except 15 to 24 and 25 to 34-year-olds show an increase over all 3 years. Next slide, please. If you look at this by, I'm sorry, I think if you want to go back one slide, I think we skipped over sex. So yeah, males are more likely to overdose on stimulants than females, and stimulant overdoses without an opioid have been increasing in both men and women since 2017. If you want to go to the next slide, please, we can look at the breakdown by race. And we can see here that Black or African American individuals have a higher rate of stimulant-related overdoses regardless of the presence of an opioid, but they do have a much higher rate of stimulant overdoses without the presence of an opioid, although these overdoses have been increasing among the white and other unknown races as well. Next slide, please. And our last demographic breakdown is by ethnicity. We can see that Hispanics have a higher rate of stimulant plus opioid overdoses than non-Hispanics, but a lower rate of stimulant overdoses that do not involve an opioid. And if you want to go to the next slide. So just some of the takeaways, stimulant prescriptions in Pennsylvania have been increasing over the years, with the largest increases occurring among adults. Despite an 18% decrease in any drug overdose deaths from 2017 to 2018, stimulant overdoses that do not involve an opioid have continued to increase. The majority of overdose deaths in Pennsylvania involve cocaine or methamphetamine, again, which I mentioned, the latter of which is very rarely prescribed to Pennsylvania residents. And thinking about, how the opioid epidemic is played out and how that might relate to stimulants, currently the literature on prescription stimulants for the treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in childhood and adolescence and the risk for later substance abuse, those results have been mixed, with some showing no effect and some showing that there's actually a decreased risk for substance abuse later in life when ADHD has been appropriately treated in childhood and adolescence. But then while the diagnosis and treatment of ADHD in adults is increasing and prescribing is increasing, the literature really has focused on the effects of treatment among children and adolescents. So that's an area where, we could definitely do some more work in looking at this connection among adults. And I think my last slide is my contact information. So if you have any questions, happy to have you reach out. Although I believe that we do have some time left for questions this morning.
Thank you so much, Carrie. We do have a couple questions that I set aside that were asked in the chat. John, I believe the first one was directed to you. And that question is, how are we sure that the increased overdose deaths associated with increased drug seizures isn't because of the seizures?
I'm sorry, can you hear me? I'm not sure. Yes, thank you. Um, the law enforcement seizures reflect those drugs that are taken off the street during arrests, criminal investigations and arrests. So the drugs involved with seizures are no longer available on the street for anyone to use or misuse. So it's the deaths are occurring and overdoses are occurring where there is some of the supply that still has not been taken off the street by the seizures. And obviously we know that that not everything that is on the streets is going to be captured by law enforcement. It's only a portion of it. So the seizures are simply a reflection, but an accurate reflection of the supply side of what's being misused, what's being abused. So it's a way. So it not only the seizures then have a double benefit. One is they get a lot of the drug off the street, and it's no longer available for misuse. But it also gives us a way of tracking and identifying what is going on quickly, identifying what's going on in the way of misuse of drugs. I hope that answers the question, and if not, feel free to ask more.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Another one for you. And that question is there any initiative to have methadone added to PDMP so that medical providers can be aware of potential dangers of prescribing substances that could pose a health risk?
That is an issue that is being explored by SAMHSA. Let me just point out that methadone can be used in two ways. One, it can be used in the treatment of pain, like any other opioid. And when that is the case and it's prescribed by a physician or other prescriber to a patient, then that does get recorded into the prescription drug monitoring program. But the other aspect, which is the drug treatment program aspect, where methadone is used to treat persons who are suffering from substance use disorder, then that data has not been reported in the past. There's been discussion about that. I would point out that buprenorphine, on the other hand, which is being used for treatment, where it's prescribed by independent prescribers for their patients, that does get reported in. So more and more is getting reported. And I personally, speaking professionally, I hope that all of the methadone will get reported so that a prescriber who goes into the system can see what their patient is getting in the way of other controlled substances prior to issuing a prescription. Whether that be a stimulant or an opioid, the prescriber needs to know what the patient is getting in order to make an adequate and proper decision about what to prescribe.
Perfect. Thank you, John. One more question for you, I believe, John. Is there any correlation geographically of seizures to overdoses?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there's very strong correlation. As I pointed out earlier in my comments, the state of Ohio has done some very detailed work, and they've looked at fentanyl, they've looked at heroin, they've looked at cocaine, they've looked at meth, and there is a very strong correlation in that state between the seizures and the overdose deaths, and that correlation is so strong that it's actually month by month. That the correlation coefficient is above 90 in most of those cases, not all of them, but several of them. So it's a very strong correlation there between those two, and it is geographical, as I point out. We're actually, ironically, taking a look at rural communities to see whether we can help predict what's going to happen in rural communities. By the time you get down to actual individual counties, the seizures in those areas that may or may not actually have the same direct relationship. A state is a big enough geographical area that you can get see those kinds of, and observe those kinds of problems. I'm not sure it's going to get down to county level. We're not sure yet. we're looking at that.
Great. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you so much. Carrie, I believe the next few questions are for you. And the first one is, do you project that there will be an increase in older people on RX stimulants over the next few years as the younger group, age 0 to 17,
sure,
gets older?
I think this phenomenon is already occurring. You know, we didn't start prescribing stimulants at the time that our data started. So, you know, of course, there's always going to be, you know, children who are prescribed stimulants who transition off them as adults. There will be those that continue. But we've also been looking at, you know, our stimulant naive definition, and we're definitely seeing an increase in what appears to be initiation of stimulants, at least, you know, with no record of a prescription within the last 12 months. So, you know, like I said, people have already been aging into different age groups over the years that we've been looking at this data. So, you know, we're going to see a combination of that.
Great. Thank you so much. Next question. Has the department considered offering prescribing guidelines or best practices for medical professionals when it comes to prescribing
and we're
for
actually,
stimulants,
I
as we did
referenced
for
our
opiates?
stimulant prescribing guidelines work group earlier. You know, that is something that we're actively involved in right now. I don't have a timeline for that, but it's in the works.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next question. What is the reason some coroners are not participating in providing of overdose
Yeah, I don't
data?
have the map in
And
front
which
of me
are
right
they?
now to look at those who are not participating. I will note that, you know, the biggest concern that we have heard recently is really just a lack of staff, time, and resources, particularly with the COVID pandemic that is happening right now. You know, they've been seeing an increased number of deaths and cases that they need to investigate. So that's probably the biggest barrier, is staff and time resources in the individual offices. You know, we.
Great, thank you.
No,
And
thank
Kelly,
you.
if you would, I'm sorry, go ahead. Kelly, you can follow up with Carrie as well if you would like to get further data on that in the future then. Next question. What is the actual cause of death with an overdose of a psychostimulant? Is it the high temperature
I
of
will
a
say
patient
I
or
am
organ
not a
failure?
medical professional. I'm an epidemiologist, so I'm a data person. We did touch on this briefly yesterday, where you know, it was noted that hypothermia and renal failure can contribute to deaths in these stimulant overdoses. We see a lot of cardiovascular or cerebrovascular accidents, so lots of heart attacks and strokes associated with stimulant overdoses.
Great, thank you. Next question. Are there efforts to educate prescribers about the risks of stimulant use disorders?
I'm not sure necessarily coming from my office. I don't know if there's anyone from DDAP that wants to weigh in about the treatment aspects of it.
John, I think you're still muted.
Yeah, I was going to add that I hope that CDC will take this issue on as the COVID-19 epidemic begins to decrease, because it's really important that we get that information out there. I understand that CDC has been just overwhelmed with the whole COVID pandemic for the time being, but I'm really hoping that they can get back to this issue soon and begin to take on the education of prescribers.
Absolutely. Last question then we have here. Will it be possible to share the data on seizures with providers so they can respond in real time to an increase in supply in Pennsylvania?
I'll take a stab at answering that question. The answer, I hope, will be yes. There is a very rich resource available, certainly within the high-intensity drug trafficking area known as the Mid-Atlantic Liberty HIDA, which includes Pennsylvania, and they've been totally involved in establishing the stimulant Symposium, and are very effective and active group that works with your state. In addition, there are state resources that may be able to be brought to bear, and I'm more than happy to work with anybody in your state and in the HIDA who wants to work on this issue. My understanding is there's a presentation later on regarding the a Pennsylvania Emerging Threat Initiative development to try to tackle this kind of question for the state. And I encourage anybody who is interested to participate in that session if you can.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. It looks like that's the last of the questions for today. So I guess we can wrap up. Thank you both so much for being here and sharing your insights. Just a quick reminder to all attendees that the next round of breakout sessions will begin promptly at 10 a.m. So you have about 5 more minutes than you would have had before. So go get some food, do whatever you need to do, and we'll see you back after the break.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.